Hi, everybody. My name is Tish Shute, and I'm the Director of AR/VR Corporate Technology Strategy and Planning at Huawei, and I'm also the co-founder of Augmented World Expo and augmentedreality.org. Before I begin my talk, just a quick note that all the opinions expressed are my own and not of any organization or company. The age of light, from an electronic to a photonic society. It is going to be hard for me to do justice to this big title in 20 minutes and to convey how important I think this transition to photonics is for the world in general and for AR/VR in particular, and the central role that AR/VR will play in creating a photonic society that can realize a better world for all. For me, it has been a lifelong journey. I was introduced to photonics early by my dad, who was a professor of histology at Cambridge University and was one of the first scientists there to use an electron microscope. My dad was a member of a now nearly extinct generation who basically was able to combine hard science with a very wide variety of interests. And he became very interested in something called the McCulloch effect, which is a very obscure perceptual effect. But amazingly, this led to tracing the neural pathways of memory and cognition, and this has great relevance to Alzheimer's work today. So a little bit about my background in AR/VR. I began in visual effects for film and television, and my first startup was a 6 degree of freedom motion control robot pictured in this slide. This robot ran on a track and allowed us to seamlessly blend virtual effects with real live action footage. And so I began doing augmented reality for film. I met Ori in 2008, actually at an academic AR/VR conference called ISMAR, and our passion for bringing AR/VR to the mainstream enabled us to begin this journey, which I think you will all agree that it's turned out pretty well. And I was also lucky enough to spend 4 years working with the great simulation game designer Will Wright, who is also a master of AI. So what is photonics? Photonics is the generation, transmission, and utilization of light and electromagnetic radiation. And this manipulation of light and matter for communications and sensing is already having a profound effect on many industries, and it is transforming the fields of computing, engineering, physics, biology, and chemistry. This is something I really love. Our ability to manipulate light and matter has become exquisite. And in this work by Daniel Smalley and team, lasers steer a particle of light in space, and by projecting color onto it, are able to form fast enough for the human eye to construct a 3D image. And they're still very tiny, but I mean, this is just phenomenal, and the future of holograms, which is something of great interest to us all. But photonics is already very present in our lives. It's not just a technology of the future, and in fact, many of our familiar AR/VR wearables are based on photonics. And we are already seeing companies working on the photonic city, combining Li-Fi with street lighting for traffic management and communication. And the image on the right is a smart city project just begun in London that is basically going to bring lighting into the city in a way that transforms the city, in much the way augmented reality will on our phones and in smart glasses is transforming the world. And I think this is extremely relevant for all of us. I mean, just for all the developers here, you have only just begun to scratch the market of what AR, VR, and XR can do. And the photonic brain, this is actually incredibly exciting work. And perhaps, perhaps the most transformative work of all that photonics is doing. And basically, photonics is enabling us to map the neural circuits and give us optical access to the brain, which of course is the first step to the read-write brain, and of AR, as we all know from the world and our experiences creating apps for the outer world, AR, VR, and XR is the natural interface for this inner world as it is for the outer world. So again, just beginning. And another really critical role photonics is playing in AR, VR, XR is because, again, something we all know from all our work to work on the predictive tracking for headsets so that we don't make ourselves sick every time we put on a VR headset. AR, VR, XR is dependent on perception engineering. It happens at the intersection of engineering and human biology. And the image on the right is actually new work that is showing how the ear and the brain are totally linked. So this has profound implications for AR and VR and XR. One of the most important characteristics of photonic devices is that they can operate at extremely low or no power. And photonics are the key to the low-power future of XR, VR, and AR. Anyone who's been involved in the journey of making HMDs and smart glasses know that it's all about power, form factor. These are the big challenges. And it isn't just the eyewear where we need this new low-power approach to information and data processing. It's actually for the communications. At the moment, we couldn't sustain our vision of AR, VR. And our overall goal is really reverse engineering the human being and figuring out how the human brain achieves always-on dense semantic vision at 10 watts. And how does the central nervous system communicate? So we're just at the beginning. And this is why I really think actually, when I use the title The Age of Light, this is the most profound transformation of the next 10 years. And why do I think it's now? Why do I think it's going to happen and accelerate very fast now? It is because we're at this perfect storm at the end of Moore's law, where we have the hot air of the new demands for data processing and information processing, and essentially, as we all know from the explosion of AI, this is going to permeate across all of the communications industries. And what it's running into is a cold front. And that cold front is this end of Moore's law and the difficulty electronics has scaling now to meet the needs of this hot air of AI and autonomous vehicles and smart cities. So I'm pretty sure this is really going to accelerate extremely fast, which is good news for everyone in AR, VR, and XR. And another point, I don't know if you remember, we used to say, superpowers to the people, AR, VR for everyone. This is actually, in the current paradigm of electronic data communications and information processing, impossible. If you look at some of these stats on the current energy consumption of US residents, if you put this across the world, it would not scale. And I highly recommend this article, Atogeal Optoelectronics for Low Energy Information Processing and Communications by David Miller. It's the definitive text on this. So advantages of photonics over electronics. There are many, and they all point in the same direction. They point to miniaturization, but most powerfully, they point to low and nearly zero power devices for the complete stack, is my argument, from data communications, optical interconnects, to displays. So, anyway, again, there's a few people in the audience who've been here from the beginning, and this display challenge has haunted AR, VR, and XR my whole career. And quite frankly, it's always been 5 years away. And I still hear people say today, oh, we will have the perfect form factor, the natural, stylish AR, VR glasses, but we won't have it for 5 years. But photonics is the difference that makes the difference. And I personally truly believe we will be seeing these displays actually in under 5 years. And something more, displays are actually the bottleneck for computing in emerging markets. Many people all over the world do not have access to the kind of computing we have now, let alone AR, VR, and XR. And these, a low-power eyewear that can give people high-fidelity computing, forget just, not just AR, VR, and XR, would be transformative for the world. And again, photonics is the path to that. History of photonics. Of course, photonics began with optics, but a profound transformation, and really the birth of photonics, the transition from optics to photonics, happens with Einstein. Because the concept of a photon actually comes from quantum theory, which is stunningly counterintuitive and may make you squirm and wonder how we can work with this. But actually, it's incredibly practical and quantum mechanics is already solving many, many engineering problems for us. And again, if you want to follow up on this, please read this book by David Miller, Quantum Mechanics for Scientists and Engineers. It's beautifully written and very, very readable. And I hope you will see the practicality and the applications. But if you're not ready to take on the science and the math, there is actually some wonderful text for people who can understand this weird quantum behavior of light very simply. The book on the right, Quantum Physics for Babies, is part of actually one of the other early co-founders of OR, Worley's efforts to really democratize this understanding of quantum physics, and he collaborated with Chris Ferry. So what has quantum mechanics really ever done for us? And this wonderful article by Chad Ozel of Forbes basically says, the internet is a giant world-spanning, life-changing practical application of quantum mechanics. And of course, that's mostly at the optical communications, but what I'm trying to convey here is we're just at the dawn of this becoming part of the world of data processing, of data communications, information processing, and the glasses. So, if you already understand a bit about quantum mechanics, hands up anyone who's got vague ideas on quantum mechanics. Yeah, so that's great, that's good. But if you do, you will understand how absolutely mind-boggling this speculative research is. Quantum entanglement holds together DNA. That is positioning one of the weirdest, most extraordinary effects of quantum mechanics at the heart of the center of life. And I won't, it's a whole other 40 minutes to speculate on what that means, so I'll move on. But I cannot really even mention DNA without mentioning one of the pioneers of light science, Rosalind Franklin. Her X-ray diffraction images of DNA enabled the University of Cambridge scientists Francis Crick and James Watson to identify the structure of the double helix. And I'm sure you've all heard of Crick and Watson, but probably not Rosalind Franklin, who unfortunately was left off the Nobel Prize. And so I wanted to do more about women in light science because there's many, many more than can fit on this slide. But I'll just mention perhaps the physicist Mary Spaeth, inventor of the tunable laser. And why that is so significant, although I've got to go back, Henrietta Swan-Leavitt, who discovered the relation between luminosity and the period of the Cepheid variable stars, and it became the method to know the size of our galaxy. It's big stuff, and the scale of the universe. But back to lasers. Lasers are the power tools of photonics. And laser devices are at the core in instruments for many industries at this point, including transportation, healthcare, and telecom. And this is, if you go to a photonics conference, you will mostly see these applications, but these are huge markets. So photonics will shape the future of 5 key technologies for AR/VR. New displays, evolution of processing, AI, ultra-fast and energy-efficient networking, and deep perception. It's central to the realization of our dreams. And last year I mentioned the biggest trend in AR/VR since MR, since 2010, was mobile first to AI first. And this is perhaps this is the first area we're really seeing startups emerge in an information processing area that's critical to our future. And these new architectures for fully optical neural networks are beginning to be worked on by startups. And this is absolutely fundamental to realizing our dreams for AR/VR. We need this ultra-fast, low-power processing. We want our AI matrix multiplier right up here. We don't want it up in some giant, power-hungry machine that would, basically not be very good for the planet. And so this was my point. Are they still 5 years away? I would say not. And why? Because this is nanophotonic 2D materials and metalenses and metasurfaces, which again are just beginning to emerge into the mainstream. And this will give us the flat, light, full fidelity AR, VR, and XR displays that we dream of. And this was another point that I was really into last year in my talk, that we're moving, augmentation, we have beginning to think of as the upgrading of human beings. And it's not so much about upgrading our external tools. It's more about the human body and mind merging with our tools. And this work on biocompatible sensors interfacing optoelectronics to neurons is already accomplishing amazing things. Dan Palika's work restoring vision with retinal implants of biocompatible sensors is exemplary. And even further than that, we're moving from this ability to just image the brain to mapping and controlling complex behaviors. So this is a project out of Stanford on imaging in mice, and actually this goes as far as being able to change their behavior. And I don't know whether other startups, but this is the first startup I've seen who's applying this new understanding of neuroscience to some of our classic problems in AR, VR, and XR. And Cortical AI is developing next generation avatars using motor cortex and cerebellum simulations trained in the latest motion capture to drive realistic visual renderings with natural animations of human faces and figures. And I bet there's a few people here working on avatars, and this is exciting stuff. And this is another superpower of AR, VR that is so critical to this, understanding this new world from the nanoscale to the vast cosmic scale of the universe. And I would argue that AR, VR, XR has to be the OS for this. And already this is just emerging. There are startups. I saw one on the floor, RSA MD, beginning to take on this challenge of this amazing diagnostic medical imaging that starts from the nanoscale and finer all the way up to the systems level. And this amazing power, we have to image our organs. We really need AR, VR, and XR to make it useful. So this is another area that's going to explode for this community. And the photonics community is excited by AR, VR, and MR. And I encourage everyone to try and go to some of these conferences, get to know this community, because this intersection is going to create many exciting things. And then finally, the future of photonics. And one of the things that's been very difficult in photonics is it's extremely complex to design and optimize new systems. This work from Professor Helena Vukovic at Stanford is groundbreaking. It's the difference that will make the difference. Because as we all know with AI, it it really suffered for years from the lack of tools. Yes, the lack of processing, but it was this emergence of tools that could bring many more people into the AI world and allow them to use it and apply it for all kinds of applications. And this work from Professor Vukovic is opening a door to a world where computers will do the heavy lifting of design and optimization, opening up the field to a broader community of engineers, inventors, and entrepreneurs. So, this is to rephrase Bruce Sterling's famous what he said in 2010 at Augmented Reality event, which was our name then. It's 9 a.m. in the age of light. And photons will replace electrons in most of our important technologies. And this is something very interesting. I'm glad to hear Ori quoted Marshall McLuhan, and I'm going to quote him too, because once the technology comes into a social milieu, it cannot cease to permeate that milieu until every institution is saturated. And this was actually Eugene Marlowe's blog. I love the way he phrased this. This is true of orality, early writing, typography, electronics, and now photonics. So this is exciting news for this community, because this is a train that I do not think will stop, and all that you've been learning, struggling with, working out how to make AR, VR, and XR the interface to the outer world. Now it's the photonic society, it's the photonic city, it's the photonic brain, and we are going to get our devices, which is very good news for us. So thank you, and my name is Tish Shute, and you can always reach me. I always use the same front to my email, so if you want to find me on Gmail or my work email, this is how you find me. And thank you for attending this conference.